Hey everyone, Nicole Herrick here with you. Today I'm going to show you how I turned these ugly, disgusting early 90s tiles into some pretty white herringbone ones. If you haven't already seen my video on how to tear out the tiles and install new drywall, gyprock, plasterboard, then I will leave a link up here and also down in the description below. So let's just go over the basics of using a manual tile cutter. I definitely recommend this. You can do it indoors, it's no mess and it's relatively quiet, so super easy to use as well. So they're relatively cheap as well, like 20 to 30 bucks for a manual tile cutter. And ask your neighbours, somebody's usually got one in their garage that they're more than happy to lend you. So the other black tool that I have here is called a speed square, and that's going to be your best friend to line up your tiles to cut that perfect 45-degree angle. Okay, so all you need to do is line up your tile on the machine using your speed square, and then you want to push down and create a score. Now this doesn't have to be super hard or anything, it's just a scratch. And on most manual tile cutters, what you would do is just draw the scratcher back and then push down, and that will snap the tile for you. Unfortunately, this one I bought, the snapper wasn't working very well, so I just used some tile snapping plier things that I had on hand and just did it manually. Now your tile won't always snap perfectly. Sometimes you'll have a little corner that might chip out or a little bit of excess that you need to clean up. So just make sure you have a file on hand so that you can just take off any edges that are sticking out a little bit too much or any corners that didn't snap off properly. Save your extra pieces that you might have snapped incorrectly. Lay them on the side so that you can use them for another piece later. If your kitchen has a corner like mine, you really want to start from that corner so that you can line up the tiles to be exactly meeting. So before we actually get started tiling, I wanted to show you how I figured out which tiles to cut at what size. And we're going to talk about my 1, 2, 3, 4 method. These are the 4 tiles that we're going to repeat all the way across the bottom edge of our wall. Number 1 is only going to have a cut in this corner. Everywhere else, it will be a full tile. So I'm going to start by doing a mock tile placement on the wall that I'm not starting on, which is the right-hand side wall there. So to get an accurate thickness of what this is going to look like when it's finished, I'm just taping some of my tile spaces on there. They're 1.5 mil. So this will be sort of roughly the depth of the tile adhesive. I'm also using a ruler running along the bottom because I want to leave a little gap along the bottom and not sort of place the tiles directly on the bench to allow for movement. Now we can do our first cut tile. So I want you to cut off the top right hand corner on a 45 perfectly to that corner. This is going to give us 2 and 4, so 2 different pieces. Coincidentally, it will also be the same shape as 1. So now we're going to dry fit these as well to mark out a vertical line that we can work from. So popping our number 1 tile in that bottom corner there, we are just going to, hey there, oh, don't show your bum, Coco. Oh, I love you, see you later. So sorry about that, guys. Pop your tile in and make sure it's on the 45 perfectly and just do a little dot on that far left corner. Now I've already drawn this line obviously, so I'm just showing you, but pop your spirit level there and just draw yourself a nice straight vertical line. So now that you have that in place, we can start to line up our first 2 pieces. So the tip of the little triangle is going to be on the line, and the left tip of the number 1 tile is going to be on the line as well. So now we need to work out where to cut for our number 3 piece. So you're going to use your little triangle piece and you're going to line it up on the bottom edge on the left hand side and add 1.5 mil or whatever your spaces are. Mark a little dot and then we can grab our speed square and do a 45 going up to the right hand side. Now this is going to run along the bottom edge. It'll all make sense in a second, I promise. So here we are looking at the first 4 tiles for the corner section. So we've got our 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'm just labeling those so I know which is which and I don't get confused. Okay, now we need to figure out how many of these tiles we're going to need to cut to run across the full length of the wall that I'm working on. So to do that, I just measure the entire bottom edge of this, which was roughly 40 centimeters, and then I can figure out how many times does 40 centimeters fit across the bottom of my wall. And I also want to count how many number 1s I'm going to have to trim to go up the wall in the corner. So now I can take the time to create the 2, 3, 4s. So I needed 7 sets of those, and I just needed 4 of the ones going up, so the number 1 with the cut in it. Now let's talk about tile adhesive or tile mastic. So I used the Davco range from Bunnings. It was quite cheap. I accidentally grabbed the one on the left because it was super cheap, but with white tiles, you should never use a grey tile adhesive or mastic because you might have a problem of bleed through. I also grabbed a bucket that came with a lid just so I could take a break if I needed to without it drying out too much. So you need to start with water in your bucket. I would definitely recommend about 1/4 of the level of the bucket with water, and then top it up to 3/4 with the powder. I accidentally used half a bucket of water, so I had to sort of tip some out later and put a lot more powder in, but everything turned out fine. If you don't already have a mixing paddle that you can attach to your drill, I would definitely recommend grabbing one. This one was $15 and well worth that to save my arms. Now you need to go as slow as you possibly can when you're mixing because you don't want to put lots of air bubbles into your tile adhesive. And I would recommend using a power corded drill rather than a battery operated one, just as you need a fair bit of power. If you are going to use a battery operated one, pop a large amp hour battery like a 4 or a 5 amp hour on it so that you have enough power to mix. Now this is the consistency that we're looking for. You can just keep adding powder until we get that, and you want it to not drip straight away as you lift the puddle. It needs to wait about 5 seconds before it will drip out. Now also just check that your drill is not getting too hot because you do not want to burn it out. Mine was fine. Now we're finally ready to pop some tiles on the wall. So I have my piles of pre-cut tiles and I had to let my tile adhesive sit for 10 minutes. My orange one there is the notched tile spreader. This one was cheap and totally fine. I've also got a trowel there to put on the initial layer, but I found that my broad knife was just a little bit easier for me because I have small hands and I just needed to go with what was comfortable for myself as an absolute beginner. If I haven't already said it, this is my first time ever tiling, so I'm showing you this as a complete beginner, just showing you how I did my herringbone tiles. I watched loads and loads and loads of professionals doing it, just on other YouTube videos. I'll link some below, but I wanted to show you how I worked it out because the methods that they showed me were super helpful, but I just couldn't wrap my head around the 1, 2, 3, 4 and how to do it. So this is why I'm doing a tutorial for you, just showing you from an absolute beginner's perspective. So I started off doing vertical lines with my tile adhesive and then just found it wasn't quite even. So I did some horizontal lines and that looked nice and even. Now I had to make sure I could still see that vertical line that I had drawn with my spirit level, and I laid my little tile first and just made sure that the point lined up perfectly with that vertical line, and then I could lay my next tile and then my corner tile. I added a couple of tile spaces and then just a little bit more of my tile adhesive so I could get this last tile of the 1, 2, 3, 4 on. And then I was able to place a few more of my number 1s that were pre-cut going up the wall vertically and making sure I spaced in between. And I was making sure that each of my number 1 tiles were lining up with that vertical line that I drew with my spirit level. Now I can put in my full tiles, so on the down slope of my V. So I kept looking at my pattern as either an upside down V, which it is currently, and then when I get to the next sort of vertical row, it's a right side up V. So I just kept checking that because it was easier to look at it as V's so that I could make sure that every tile was going into the right position. Does that make any sense? I don't know. It made sense to me. So here you can see me setting a tile incorrectly. It's easy to do, trust me. So that's why my V's were very important, so I could sort of stand back every time I place a tile and go, oh, hang on, that's not a V. You've only got a few minutes of working time with this tile adhesive. So if you do place one incorrectly, just grab it off the wall, add some new tile adhesive and scrape that down, and then just clean off the back of your tile. Super easy. I also just had a wet rag handy for any time that a little bit of the tile adhesive got onto my tiles. There's plenty of working time to actually get that off, but it was just easy to keep everything as clean as possible as I went. So I want to note here that the one just before I previously set is my new number one that is an uncut version of my number one. So the number one is only cut when it's in that right hand side corner there. And then as I go along the bottom of the wall, it becomes a full tile. So just to reiterate my 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern, here is the first 1, 2, 3, 4, and here is the next 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's get to a more tricky bit, and that is figuring out all of your cut pieces for the top level. So I'm just using some A4 paper because it is the same length as my tiles. My tiles are 100 by 300 millimeter. So I'm making some paper templates. Now, this is just one method. There are some other methods, but I'll get to those later. This is helpful if you're a very visual person. So with the paper templates, I was able to fold wherever I needed to, and then I could mark it with a pencil. And then I also used my speed square a lot just to draw the exact correct angle. I could cut out wherever I needed to, and then fold to do the next line that I needed to cut. So once I had done a few templates for an area, I marked them A, B, C, D, E, etc. And then as I peeled those templates off the wall, I actually wrote on the wall itself directly A, B, C, D, E. And I also sort of marked where that tile edge was going because it does get a little bit confusing with all your angles here. And then I could simply tape my template onto my tiles and then do any cuts that I needed to. So any that I could do on the manual cutter, I just did straight on there. And then right now we're going to get into using an angle grinder to do your more complex cuts. I used masking tape for my more complex cuts because I wanted to be able to draw a really nice thick line, which you can't necessarily do on the tile, but you can do it on top of tape. And then the masking tape is also very helpful because you need to be able to give a bit of structural integrity to your tiles when you're sort of hitting them with an angle grinder, and sort of any little fine edges, they just need a bit of extra support. A ceramic blade for an angle grinder is pretty cheap, around $10. So I found that scoring the line first was very helpful, and I just made sure I didn't cross over when it came to a point. Once I'd done the score line, I could then go in and just plunge more into the tile, but try not to plunge too much when you're getting to that point. We're going to plunge through the back of the point when we flip the tile over, and then it doesn't matter if we cross at that point because it'll be hidden on the back. And guys, make sure you're wearing a mask and gloves when you're doing this. The powder that comes out of these tiles is pretty gross. Be nice and gentle. You'll feel it snap once it does, and if you need to nibble any out of that teeny tiny corner, just use the tip of your angle grinder, and there we go. Some nice, simple but complex cuts. for marking PowerPoint holes, I measured the size of my PowerPoints, and then I did sort of just a rough outline of where I could see the edges were. Obviously, you can't see through your tiles, so you can't just draw a perfect square. So I ended up making a little template where I could draw my perfect box size to cut. And then I taped off everything so I could draw a nice solid line. And then I also added more tape, and I taped it down to a plank of timber just so that I had something that I could plunge into and everything was nice and secure. Again, I did my score lines first, and then I plunged in as much as I could without crossing over on those corners. And then when I flipped it over onto the back, that's when I finished off those corners. Unfortunately, I forgot to film the bit where I was finishing off the back, but you get the gist. I then made sure my power was turned off completely at the mains and dry fitted my tile around the PowerPoint. And I just use a spare one to prop it up there. And then I use my speed square and my level to get the tile above it into the right spot. So I'm matching it up with its flipped other half on the side of the wall that's already been tiled. So once I had that in the right spot, I just marked it with a pencil, and then this just sort of helped me to figure out my vertical line that I needed to draw with my spirit level. And then once I had that in place, I could then also mark where my one around the PowerPoint was going, just because I have to sort of take these out to be able to put the mud in, and it was a little bit tricky, so it just helped to mark those tiles. So then basically I just moved the tile out of the road a little bit and popped some tile adhesive just around the PowerPoint. Wasn't too worried about using the notch trowel for just this one particular tile. It was fiddly, so I just wanted to get it in there. I just took my time making sure I didn't get any of the tile adhesive in where the wires are, and just pressed it in. Easy. I just back butted the next tile so I could place it on the wall. And then I wanted to show you here that anytime you've got tile adhesive still left on the wall, you want to scrape that off, just so that if you're not putting a tile on there straight away, it doesn't dry all globby. You just basically wipe it off. Also, I just wanted to show you another way of measuring where you need to cut when you're meeting up to a cupboard. If you flip the tile over and then mark where it's going to meet the next tile, but leaving your 1.5 mil, and then if you transfer that line to the front of your tile, if you cut that off, it will fit perfectly in. So just off screen here, well done filming, Nicole. You can see me just marking that 45 line on the front side of the tile. And now when it's cut, it fits perfectly where I need it to. I didn't like this method just because I'm that visual person. And let's quickly talk about back buttering. That is basically just putting the tile adhesive on the back of the tile instead of on the wall. Now this is really helpful when you're working in a tight space on the wall and it's difficult to actually get any kind of tool in there to spread it out on the wall. So for example, these smaller tiles. So spread it on and then hold your tile directly over the bucket and swipe downwards towards the bucket so that the tile adhesive can drip straight into it. When you put your tile on the wall, give it a little wiggle back and forth before putting in your spaces, and don't worry too much about an unevenness between the tile and the cupboard. You can fill that with caulk later. Are you ready to start talking about grout? Because I am. I used the Dunlop Flexible Ultra White Grout and it was great stuff. So just add a little bit of water at a time. You don't want to start with like all the water that's recommended straight away, because if it's too much, then you've used all of your grout paste, grout powder, and you've got none left to add back in. It ain't like you can add some flour, okay? Once you get it to this consistency, it should be good. So to apply the grout, all we need to do is scrape some out and start putting it into our crevices. Now you're supposed to go across in a diagonal across the direction of your grout line. So because my tiles are already in a diagonal, I'm going up and down and left to right. So just basically spread it on there basically, and then you're going to come in and use the side of your grout smoother paddle. Float. It's a grout float, just to sort of smooth everything in. Okay, really easy, like you don't need much instruction on this. What I will say though is don't use one of those little squeegee grout spreaders. They are absolutely terrible and I do not recommend them. Spend the $5 or whatever it costs to get one of these sort of foam-faced grout floats and you will be thanking me. Ooh, yeah. Another thing you need to keep in mind with herringbone tiles is that if it doesn't meet a cupboard, then you need some kind of edging. So this is called tile edging. You can see here at the top and at the right-hand side of my tiles. And it's just a simple L-shape aluminium strip, and you can cut it with a hacksaw, and you just basically place it behind the tiles as you're adhering them to the wall. Now, try not to get too far ahead of yourself when you are grouting, because you do need to go back to each section 15 minutes after you've put the grout in and wipe off all of the excess with a damp, dense fiber sponge. Just keep rigging that sponge out with water every few seconds and just keep wiping, and you'll see it will start to look like proper grout. Then you need to leave it dry for an hour and then go back in with a dry microfiber towel and then buff off all of that haze. Now, if you've left it for a little bit too long and it's a little bit difficult to get off with a microfiber towel that's dry, you can go in just gently with a wet rag and just give it a little bit of a wipe first and then go back in with the dry towel, and it will be a lot easier to just buff that off to a beautiful shine. And guys, if you don't mind me saying, my very first time tiling, I'm very happy with this. Hello? Can we pretend like we're civilized animals? Good girl, Cheeky. Go. Get out of the sink.